Hey, welcome to episode 81 of the Gig Life Podcast. I'm your host, Stevie Taylor. Before we chat to Kav Temperley, I just wanted to let you know that you can subscribe to the Gig Life Podcast. So go to the giglifepodcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts and hit that subscribe button. To help spread the word, please share the podcast, or if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please leave a review. That'll help people find us. As you know, the Gig Life Podcast is free. You don't have to pay anything ever. But if you find value in the Gig Life Podcast, you can securely donate. Go to thegiglifepodcast.com and click on that donate button. You can give as little or as much as you like. Any donation will go back into creating the great content for this podcast. Okay, episode 81, Kav Temperley. Here we go. My guest today is Kav Temperley. Kav is the lead singer, bassist and songwriter for great Fremantle rockers Eskimo Joe. The Eskies have made 6 studio albums, 3 of those debuting at number 1 on the ARIA charts, and juggernaut Black Fingernails Red Wine staying 62 weeks in the Australian top 50. That's just a few of their impressive achievements. As well as Eskimo Joe, Kav started a small indie record label called Dirt Diamond Productions. He's written and released some solo music as well as being a prolific songwriter and a songwriting mentor for young musicians. Kav and his wife Beth, aka Studio Cat, also have their own podcast called HatJam. In this chat, Kav and I talked about his early days growing up in Fremantle, picking up the bass, almost going to jazz school, forming a school band, winning the campus band comp, which won them a recording session, to eventually forming Eskimo Joe. 21 years later, the Eskies are still going strong. We also talk, of course, about HatJam Podcast, which you must go and check out. It's really, really good. Just a warning, there's a bit of drug talk and references in this episode, so if you don't like hearing that kind of thing, best not listen to this one today. So, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please give it up for Kav Temperley. Cheers. All right, I think we're rolling. Kav Temperley, welcome to the Gig Life Podcast.
Thank you very much for having me, Stevie. I'd like to say it's lovely to be here, but I'm in Fremantle and whereabouts are you? I don't even know where you're broadcasting. I'm in Sydney. Okay, cool.
You might be able to tell I'm a New Zealander. I've got my All Blacks flag in the background there and my New Zealand flag, and had that out for Anzac Day the other day, which was pretty cool.
I was secretly hoping that you were, broadcasting from New Zealand, but Sydney is also cool.
Yeah. All right, let's talk a little bit, the last couple of podcasts I've done, obviously the thing we want to talk about just to start with is COVID-19 and the immediate impact it's had on you. Can you tell us maybe what was sort of happening a couple of months sort of before that happened and what you were leading into? We'll talk a bit about that, and then we'll just sort of roll back to your early days and lead up to everything.
Well, before COVID-19 hit and did what it has done, which has basically pressed pause on the whole entire world, which, is kind of nice, I guess. We were gearing up to have a big Eskimo Joe year, so we'd just been re-releasing all of our records and on vinyl. And as we did that, we put out all of the B-sides that we'd done for each record as well. So
cool.
We're putting out this kind of massive re-releasing our back catalogue on vinyl and CD and putting out all the B-sides. But we had just got up to this year. We were about to do A Song As a City on vinyl, which was a big album for us.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea was we were going to put that out in May. It's still coming out in May. And then we were going to hit the road and play these massive gigs, which was going to be A Song As a City from start to finish, and then we'd have a little break, and then we'd come on and we'd do Black Fingernails Red Wine from start to finish.
Right.
And we were all really excited about that, and it was all ready to go. And then, we all had to basically stop playing gigs or hanging out with anyone but your family. So it was, I'm sure I'm not alone in this, but it was a massive blow to not just to the fact that we were going to do this tour that we all knew was going to be quite successful, but every other show that we had booked was cancelled, and everything.
So completely cancelled. No sort of holding back to see if, because I know a few people that have had shows later in the year, they haven't been cancelled yet. They're just sort of holding on for how long I don't know, but.
Well, there was a couple that we'd been paid for, and we got to keep some of that money, and some gigs that they said they were going to reschedule, and I don't know if that'll ever happen because we're one part of the business, but these poor chaps putting on these big gigs are another part of the business, and who knows if as a organisation these people will exist in a year, because everyone knows who does this. We operate on this knife point of whether you're going to actually make money or lose lots of money. So I don't know if these guys will be around in another year who had all these gigs booked for us. We had a lot of festivals booked, but our main thing was doing this big tour in the second half of the year. And on top of that, I was going to go out and do a whole bunch of solo touring, just to kind of keep, money coming in for your family and all the rest of it.
Mm-hmm.
But on top of that, we also have my wife and myself do a podcast called HatJam, which you were telling me that you were listening to the Ben Lee episode, which is the last episode we managed to record before we were in America, and we managed to make it back like literally a week after the COVID thing hit. So we were really, really lucky. We had just recorded the Ben Lee episode and gone on a plane and got home, and a week later it was like, everyone, you're not allowed to go anywhere until the foreseeable future. So all of our things that we were doing, from gigs to podcasts to, we also do a bunch of music education stuff. All the schools had shut down as well. It basically all stopped, and we had to do a lot of scrambling to work out how we were going to continue to pay our mortgage and feed our children and all those things. And luckily enough, the government in Australia came through with this JobKeeper thing. So we were already paying ourselves some money in Eskimo Joe, so we managed to kind of get the government to pay us that money, which means we can tread water until the end of the year.
Oh,
what we've done with our Eskies gigs is we've kind of pushed it to early next year, and as opposed to all these big 1,500 capacity venues that we booked, we've scaled it back, and we've kind of tentatively booked a bunch of much smaller venues, about 700, and they'll probably be reduced capacity again. So we'll end up playing to maybe 600 people a night, but we'll end up playing for 4 or 5 nights in a row instead.
Like the old days, eh?
Yeah, that's right, man. It's time to hit the pubs.
Yeah. Awesome.
So yeah, that's our plan. And the other thing is, one of the other things that happened is I finally managed to go platinum on Virgin airlines, they've gone into administration. So I mean, they'll probably be back, but I think the main point is I don't think air travel is going to be quite as cheap as it was when we hit the road again. And coming from Perth, we're so isolated that once we do hit the road to do these big, 4 or 5 days in a row in a tiny venue gigs, we're going to end up being on the road for much longer periods of time, as opposed to going over and playing your big 2,000 capacity venue, then coming home for a week or two. And part of me doesn't mind that. I mean, anyone who plays on a regular basis, I think we're really lucky in Eskimo Joe because we've got to this point where we started in these tiny gigs. We didn't, we weren't one of those bands who just had a massive hit and suddenly had a huge audience.
Yep.
We did have a few little radio hits along the way, and that helped us, managed to get us gigs, but really how we won our fan base was going out and winning one person over at a time, playing endless amounts of shows. And because we were from Western Australia, back in the day in the late 90s, to catch a plane, it was like about $1,000 a ticket, which was a lot of money. So we would get to the East Coast and we'd be there for 10 weeks at a time, just going up and down, playing all these venues. And we slowly built it up, that by the time we kind of had done our first record and we started to play these, the big festivals like the Big Day Outs and those kinds of things, all these people who had won over in these tiny pub shows were all there in the front row ready to watch us play. And then we saw that groundswell grow with each record. So by the time our second album came out, A Song Is a City, we were playing the Big Day Outs and stuff again. It had grown a bit bigger, and then we did Black Fingernails, Red Wine, and it finally kind of tipped over, and we had a proper commercial hit. It really started to kind of translate. So, that's how we used to do it. And the funny thing is this, where we're at with the COVID thing, I feel like we're about to walk back into that world again where we're going to pay for a really expensive plane ticket. Once we get to the East Coast or wherever we get to, we're going to have to stay there and make sure that, we make that ticket work, and we're going to have to probably be on the East Coast for a couple of weeks playing show after show. But the point that I was trying to get to is when bands get really big, you don't get to get on those rolls where you're playing 4 or 5 nights a week. You play one big show and then you go home for a couple of months, and then you go out and you play another big show. You go home for a couple of months, and if you're touring a new record, you never break through that performance factor where it's just second nature. You can walk out and you can just do it. Amazing things happen in a band when they break through that place.
Yep.
And I feel like I still have such fond memories of all of the gigs we did up to the end of the Black Fingernails time, because we played so many shows. That's just what we were doing, and I feel like I can still play those songs in my sleep. But every album after that, we played big shows, but we didn't get to play as many shows, so we never broke those songs in as much. And I feel like we'll get to do that a little bit now with this new paradigm, which is playing tiny shows again.
Yeah. And the fact that you've done it before means you'll know what to expect.
Yeah, we also are a little bit older, so
that's
we
the
know
thing
what
too.
we know what to expect. We're like, oh boy,
yeah.
Can't jump around like that anymore.
Yeah. We'll come back to the Eskimo Joe stuff and all that sort of stuff. I want to go right back to where it all began for you, early childhood and all that sort of stuff. So, were you born Fremantle?
Yes. Oh well, I was born in a home birth in Mosman Park, which is like a suburb just out of Fremantle.
Okay. And was there music in your family straight away?
Yeah, there was definitely a lot of music around. I mean, my mum sung and played music. She had been like, a kind of amateur folk musician touring around Canada and those kinds of places. So
cool.
I grew up with her playing music in the family, and I had a brother I still have a brother, who is 7 years older than me. So he was probably quite a big influence as well. Like, by the time I was like, 8 or 9, there was their records that my parents were playing, but then he was listening to like The Police and Eurythmics and Run DMC and, all these bands, and house music was all starting to happen, and that was all cool and dangerous at the time. So that was quite a big influence on me as well, his musical styles. But then, there was some great records. Like I was a kid of the 80s, so, a lot of the albums that made a big impact on me were albums like Paul Simon's Gracelands, and, I could go on forever, but, and of course, Eurythmics and a lot of those kind of, slightly new wave bands that had been gentrified and turned into mega pop bands. So there was definitely a lot of music around. Lots of memories of my mum playing piano and singing, and there was always guitars and pianos and bits and pieces around, but it wasn't like there was no one in my family who was like, you could do this as a profession. You know what I mean? Right. It was that my mum was more of a visual artist. She'd gone to art school and that was her discipline. And when I became obsessed with music and there was nothing else in my world apart from just playing music, that happened more in my teen years. And by the time I was doing gigs, I remember looking back to my mum, who was this quite talented artist, and I remember being really frustrated at her because I was like, why aren't you, putting on art shows and, doing exhibitions and stuff? And she said, when you have kids and you're trying to do a painting and you've got this 3-year-old at your feet saying, I've just pooed my nappy, then that is your priority as a parent. And I understood that. And I think for being a female artist in her era, it would have been very, very hard to break out of that.
Yeah, I just had the image then, well, not an image, it actually happened when I was trying to write something in here, and my daughter, she would have been about 2 at the time, put her hand up onto my computer and she hit Command and Z at the same time.
Oh!
Bang! It was, and I lost a couple of tracks there.
Of all the two keys she could hit.
So what kind of music was your mum listening to?
I remember like a lot of Ry Cooder and Van Morrison. The Beatles were, obviously around a lot as well. And like I said, Paul Simon Graceland was a big one in the 80s, and, Dire Straits, Money for Nothing, all of that kind of stuff as well. And the interesting thing is, there were songs around that I, paid attention to, but I mean, I'll go back to Van Morrison. He was one of those artists that I know whole like by the time I discovered him as an adult, and I was like, oh wow, Van Morrison's amazing. It's that funny thing how music is just kind of, the roots of the stuff that you listen to when you were younger they're deep inside of you. And yep. I like listening to Moondance and what's the record before that? With As I Wander Through the Slipstream. Anyway, those two main Van Morrison records, I just remembered every single song on the record. I was like, how do I know all these songs? Yeah. But they were there in my childhood, and I might not have been paying, conscious, attention to what was going on, but it was seeping into my bones, obviously.
Mm. I know what you mean by that. You just get used to hearing that whole album, because sometimes it happens to me a lot with Stevie Wonder.
Oh, yeah.
I'll hear a Stevie Wonder song on the radio, and as soon as that song finishes, I'll know that there's like 2 seconds before the beat of Isn't She Lovely comes on.
Yeah, right.
Song, and then I'll start singing it, and my mates at work are going, what are you doing? I said, don't mind me. I know the whole album, don't worry about it.
I'm sure someone could write a long article about this who are way more experienced than I am, but I feel like, there's something so interesting about, the way the time in our lives when we discover albums. Lou Reed Transformer for me is a really classic one. Like, I remember that being around when I was younger and going, I like Walk on the Wild Side, but this is all a bit weird and it makes me feel a bit strange. But then at a certain point, I heard it and I was like, this is genius. This is an amazing album. And I still listen to Walk on the Wild Side as a song now, and I'm like, that's just such a great sounding song,
Yeah.
And Neil Young is another one. I love Neil Young, and when Neil Young kind of appeared in my life, I felt like it was it was the right time for me to discover that album. And sometimes it can be really frustrating because there's one of my favorite bands is a band called Spoon, and I remember being obsessed with Wilco. I still love Wilco; they're one of my favorite bands. But this Spoon album had come out, and I remember a girlfriend at the time going, you got to listen to this record. And I was like, no, it's all about Wilco. And then, of course, like 2 or 3 years later, you go back and you finally discover it and you become obsessed with it. And you're like, oh my God, why didn't I discover it then when it had just come out? I'm 3 years late for this. But it doesn't matter because, you discover that record when you're ready to, receive, that record. And I think it's a really interesting thing, like you're talking about with Stevie Wonder. It's like, these things, they're in you, but there was probably a time in your life where you'd forgotten that it was such a big influence on you.
Yeah, it's not till you hear the song and you just know. It's also from practicing and playing along to albums as well. Like I play drums, so you would sit and you'd play the whole album. So you'd finish a song that was at a certain BPM, and you knew exactly how many seconds or how many beats or where to change the beat on your left foot to count yourself in for that next song, And then, of course, you're away from the drums years later. One of those songs comes on the radio, and then it just snaps back in, eh?
See, Inner Visions for me is one of my favourite Stevie Wonder records, and a lot of that is because of Stevie Wonder's drumming on that record.
Yeah.
His hi-hat work,
he's
he's just nailing it. I think there's a bunch of footage of him recording that record as well, and I think it's such a almost tragic moment because he had broken out of that little Stevie thing finally, and he was his own artist, and he had, he was making the records he wanted to make, and then he had that accident like just after Inner Visions and lost his sense of smell, and he kind of went on a weird tangent after that, and his songs are still good, but I felt like, the guy was already blind. Why? Why do you have to take his smell as well, And I mean, like, Songs in the Key of Life and stuff, still a great record, but for me there's something that Stevie Wonder was at his coolest when he was doing Inner Visions, I think.
Agreed. When did you first pick up the bass? And was there a moment that made you go, oh man, I want to play bass?
Well, it's a pretty, I'm going to sound like an idiot when I tell this story, but I started off playing violin, and I played it from about 7 till about 12, I think. And by the time I was 12, there was no violin music that I listened to. So like there wasn't like I'm going to listen to this track by this amazing violinist. So there was no kind of real world thing where I was like, I want to aspire to be that guy,
Not Nigel Kennedy?
Well, I thought Nigel Kennedy was cool at the time. Cool, he was like the guy. I was like, I'd like to look like that, but I never listened to any of his music.
True.
But then I was about 13, and Guns N' Roses. I was about 12. 12 years old, and Guns N' Roses' Appetite for Destruction came out, and I was just like, it'd be cool as if I played the bass. And I thought it was cool because I was like, the bass has 4 strings, the violin has 4 strings. They're probably the same strings. They're completely different strings. But so I finally managed to get a bass, and I sat down. The first thing that I ever taught myself to play was the opening line to "Sweet Child of Mine," with a do do do.
Oh, you spoke about this in HatJam with Josh Pike, didn't you? Yeah,
that's right. Yeah.
So
we're
people
both
go and listen to HatJam. We'll go and listen to all of them, but the episode with Josh Pike.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, so I learnt that, and it was so satisfying being able to not only be in control of my own instrument, like I can listen to something and I can work it out, like that brain, little connection that I made having to work out that bass line was a massive leap forward for me as a musician. But also Duff McKagan playing bass, I was like, how cool is he? I want to be like Duff McKagan. And then I was like, what's the name from Metallica, Cliff Burton. I was like, I want a Rickenbacker bass like Cliff Burton. That would be cool, man. And it was that idolizing. It's like, guitars are cool because it's not actually about how well you play a guitar or a bass on stage. It's like, if you look cool with that bass on stage, there is an endorphin rush you get from that is like no other. So that's where it kind of started, and I became the bass player in the band, and then in my kind of mid-teens, I got really, really technical. I got into jazz, and I got into learning Jaco Pastorius bass lines and those kinds of things, and I got super, super technical. And about 16, I was about to apply for the Jazz Conservatorium, and I did the audition, and the people who I was auditioning, they said, look, we think you're amazing, but 16, we don't take people at 16, but if you come back next year when you're 17, we will definitely accept you. And I was like, great, okay, it's game on. And in that year of 16 to 17, that was when I discovered Neil Young, and that's when I rediscovered the Beatles, and that's when I discovered Transformer by Lou Reed. And I listened to those songs, and there was no none of that was going on in there. It was just like boom, boom,
Yep.
Boom, boom, boom. And I was like, that's cool, man. And that was a massive revelation for me in my mind. I was like, it's about the song. What can the bass do for the song? Not how many licks can I get in there, but a good groove. You know, you can still be a technical groove, but a good groove is way better than playing a million notes.
Yeah, man. Did you ever play the bass, Jacko?
Up high?
Up,
no.
Yeah? Right, because I play bass as well. I've got I actually went to a bit of a Jacko. I could never really play like Jacko, but I wanted to look like him. So I've got my jazz bass there on the wall. I had my strap and I had it right up here. And I had the hat.
Yep.
I was looking through some photos on Facebook the other day. Memory came up, and I saw that.
Well,
went, man, what was I thinking?
Well, you know, I have those moments all the time.
Yeah.
But the one thing I didn't know about Jaco Pastorius until quite recently is he died quite young.
Yeah, he did.
He walked out of a club and like some kind of biker dude was like, hey, hippie, you know, with your long hair. And, you know, this guy was a virtuoso. And he turned around and gave this guy some stick and they beat him up and he died, you know, and he was only about 27 or 28, like really, really young. Mm-hmm. So that's pretty tragic.
And he'd gone a fair bit off the rails too, I think, you know.
They all do,
They
Stevie.
all do, yeah.
They all do.
Bring in the mushrooms.
That's right.
Actually, the people listening won't know what I'm talking about with the mushrooms there because we were talking about that before we hit record. There's another episode of HatJam with Kav and Ben Lee. So just go listen to that. I'm not going to say anything else.
I should probably explain to the people who are listening what HatJam actually is.
Oh, yeah, cool.
So HatJam is a podcast that I do with my wife, and we play this game where we basically have a whole lot of names in a hat, and we get a musician in, and the musician has to pull out the first name. They put two names into the hat. The hat's already filled with lots and lots of names. They pull out the first name, and that name has to inspire the verse. And we sit down and we go, okay, cool. So, you know, imagine we pull out Sweet Dreams by Eurythmics. We have to like write a verse in the flavor of Sweet Dreams. And then once we've done that, we pull out a second name. And then in isolation, we have to write a whole chorus based on this second name. And sometimes it goes really well. And sometimes, like with the Josh Pike one, it's like actually really tricky. I think we pulled out James Brown and we're like, oh. And you actually have to listen to the Josh Pike podcast of the HatJam one just to hear him doing his impression of James Brown.
James Brown, yeah.
He's like, very funny. So we write a chorus and then we try and stitch these two ideas together. And sometimes it's really easy because the vibe's there, and sometimes it's not so easy. And then at the end of it, I say, how about you now come back and perform this as if it was a song that you were recording for your own record?
Yep.
And then at the end of every episode, we have a brand new song, and they're always amazing and really interesting. And yes, in the Ben Lee one, in the first, I generally travel to people's jam rooms to do this. That's why the whole COVID-19 thing has been very tricky. We haven't been able to record an episode since. But I traveled to people's jam rooms, and in the Ben Lee one, we're in Laurel Canyon in LA, and in about the first 5 minutes of the podcast, he offers me magic mushrooms. And I had not taken magic mushrooms in decades. I'm not going to say I'm an angel. Of course, I tried many substances. I'm a musician, for fuck's sake. But I hadn't done anything like that since my late 20s, and I'm now post 40. So I was like, okay, let's do this for the sake of a artistic adventure. We're going to do this. And so I went on the journey with Ben on magic mushrooms. So you're going to have to listen to the episode if you want to find out what happens.
Yeah, and then the reason I brought up mushrooms, because we were also talking about how some creatives need to take drugs to just be normal, just to bring them back to normal.
Well, yeah, I mean, artists have famously self-medicated throughout history, and it sometimes goes really badly, but often you'll find most people who write songs will, have a glass of wine or a coffee at the least to do what they have to do. Ben is obviously a big fan of psychedelics, hence why he was like, let's take a little bit of mushrooms. And I was like, oh boy. I'm more of a fan of just, smoking a joint. That's all I need. I'm like a little number, write down some lyrics. But for me, the whole thing about, the relation of writing and drugs is that I don't think you need the drugs to create. I think what happens if you are if you're a workman and you sit down and you take writing songs or, whatever you do very, very seriously, you don't need that to make that happen. And generally people will just do that. But I find smoking a joint at the point where I've driven that idea as far as I possibly can down the road. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to smoke a number and I'm going to sit back and just contemplate what should happen next. And then I find it can be really, really beneficial, and right. And sometimes I'll do that and then I'll wake up the next day and be like, what was I thinking? Yeah. Sarah McLeod was one of the guests that we had on the HatJam podcast. Yeah. And it was hilarious because we, after HatJam, because we've known each other for years. We had done some touring together, but we hadn't really connected as friends before. And then we did the HatJam podcast and got on really well, had a fabulous time. She's such a funny lady. Then we had a offer to write a charity song for the bushfire relief. So myself and Sarah sat down to do that, and we basically I started the song at home, and then I sent it to her, and she had a little bit of a play with it, and we got the lyrics to a point. And the lyrics were doing pretty well, and then she wrote back at this one point. I was like, okay, I've done a rewrite of the lyrics because there was some clunky bits, and she'd rewrote lyrics, and they'd just gone on this massive tangent. And I was like, I think it was pretty good before, like maybe a small tweak. And she was like, yeah, I smoked a joint and then just started taking myself really seriously and went on this long tangent. So that is the danger with the joint smoking at the end of writing a song, is that you can go on a tangent and it might not be a good tangent. Maybe what you had before was cool. All you need is just a little, little tweak.
When did you start singing? Because obviously, yeah.
Well, I think I don't think I really took myself seriously as a singer until I was about 13, 14. Mm-hmm. And that was mainly, I just kind of started writing songs when I was about 12, but about 13, 14, I started wanting to sing the songs myself, and it was more of a means to an end. I was like, well, I don't really want to play this to anyone else. I just want this to be a sacred moment with me in my room. But there's a little bit more of a backstory to that. Myself and when I was about 14, 15, I'd already started writing some songs, and I was, hadn't really sung in front of anyone yet. I'd just been writing these songs myself. And then I went over to my friend Rodney Aravena, who's one of my still very close friends. He played in End of Fashion and Sleepy Jackson and stuff. We lived together for a long time, had a great jam room. But before that, we were stinky teenagers, and I went over to his house one time, and he was a much better guitarist than I was. And we'd bought like a little bottle of Jack Daniels, and I was like, oh, these girls want to meet up at the beach tonight. And he was like, oh, yeah, cool. And he'd had one of those guitar magazines, and I think the latest song that it had in it was Stone Temple Pilots' Plush. And it's got a great guitar line. So he'd learned it on his little nylon string or whatever. And so I started to sing it and do like my best, like, Scott Weiland impressions, like, doing the whole thing. We call it quaying. Anyway, so I was quaying away. Anyway, we went to the beach that night, and I sung, he played guitar, and we both like went off into the sand dunes with different girls and, pashed on and did whatever we did. And I was like, bingo, this is awesome. If I sing, girls will actually want to kiss me. This is like a revelation for a teenager. So the next weekend we went out again and did it again. And next week out we went out and did it again. And then I think it was like about 3 or 4 weekends in, and I was just like, this is a winner, man. Like, we've got our song, we just play it, we go off and kiss girls. This is great. Anyway, he met up with one of my childhood friends, like a girl who I'd known since primary school, and, had been really close with her family and stuff. So they went off and pashed that this one weekend, and I went and pashed some other girl. And next weekend I was like, so Rod, you get ready to, like, you know, go out and do that again? He's like, oh, I was just thinking I'd hang out with Isabel again. And I was like, really? And because of that, I had to learn how to play guitar, because how was I going to go to the party, play guitar and sing at the same time?
Yep.
And the beautiful thing is Rodney and Isabel are still together and have two children. So they got together when Rod was like, 15, 16. Isabel was about 14, 15, I think. And yeah, they're still together after all these years. And I was forced to go off and play guitar and sing, and that obviously worked out well for me.
It's a happy ending all round.
But you know, through a happy ending all round. No, but through that horribly, you know, teenage grottiness, you know, I became less obsessed with doing it to girls. I could kiss a girl, and I just became obsessed with writing my own songs. And, you know, on I went, and here we are.
That's cool, man. Okay, so you're playing guitar now, you're singing, you're a bass player, you're writing songs. Did you ever get yourself into like a cover band situation, or did you kind of always see yourself as a sort of write my own songs, I want to form my own bands, I want to do my own stuff? Was that the path? And then if it was, then, you know, what was the first few bands that you started hooking into?
I think some people have the ability that when they hear a song, they know the exact chords, and they're like, oh, that's a G and that's a D, and this is the melody, and I'll sing this over the top. However my brain works, I like to call it the magic number generator. But what happens is from day one, from when me and Rod were playing and trying to pick up girls and all the rest of it, the other part of the story I didn't tell you is that I couldn't quite work out anyone else's songs, but I could go play my own songs. And so that's what I would do to try and impress girls and stuff, as I just play my own songs that I was writing. And that was mainly because I was absolutely shit at working out other people's songs. I mean, I had the Beatles complete songbook, and I could play all the Beatles songs, but even then I would completely do my own version of it. And most of the time when I was working out the Beatles, I would just get halfway through and just go, oh, fuck this, and go and do my own version. I just write
I know the chorus. That's all I need.
Yeah, that's
all
right.
I need Saturday night down on the beach.
Yeah. No, but I wouldn't even get that far. I would be like, okay, well, here's the first couple of chords of the song. In fact, I'm just going to write my own melody and my own, you know, chorus over the top of it. So, you know, cool. Despite the fact that I became really technical as a bass player in my teens, you know, when I started writing on guitar and piano, I'd never had really any lessons, so I was a lot more Kurt Cobain about how I'd play the guitar. It was all a bit clunky and rough, and so I was, you know, no one. I mean, I guess if they wanted a bass player in a band, they could hire me, or a singer or whatever. But I was way too obsessed with just writing my own songs. I never really wanted to be playing other people's songs in bands, and even if I did, I would want to do my complete own reinterpretation of it. Like I don't know why, but I was just driven to do that. And that's not to say I would hear people's songs and go, I want to learn how to play that song, but I'd just get halfway through and get the shits with it because I couldn't really work out the chords properly and just turn it into my own song. So you know, by the time I was like about 16, I got an offer to like play bass in a metal cover band at our like school ref for like a gig that they were going to put on at our high school ref. So I went in and like, you know, met up with everyone. If you're like an Australian dude, you played metal at some point in time in your life. And so I went in and like learnt a bunch of covers on the bass because I could do that, and I wasn't singing. There was somebody else going, you know, doing all the metal vocals. Because death metal was quite big at the time. And we were learning all these songs and stuff, and we did this gig at our ref, and there was another band who were playing, and they were kind of like, you know, more into the vibe that I was into at the time, because I was, you know, like most teenagers of the mid-90s, I was listening to like Mr. Bungle and Faith No More and that kind of style of stuff is what I was really into. So there was this band who are a bit more kind of funky, a little bit more Red Hot Chili Peppers, Faith No More-ish kind of stuff going on. And I was like, these guys are cool. And there was an after party after the ref, and we were all talking. And the after party just happened to be around the corner from my house. So they were like, oh, yeah, we're playing, but, the bass player who was there, he's like, I'm singing, but I don't really want to be the singer. I just want to play bass. And I was like, oh, I've been writing a bunch of songs. And so they were like, cool. And I said, well, do you guys want to come back to my house and I'll play you these songs? And they were like, yeah, okay, cool. So they came back and I played them these songs that I've been working on. And they were like, great. Do you want to become the singer of our band? And I was like, okay, cool. So for the first time in my life, I didn't have to play bass. I didn't have to play guitar. I could just sing. And that became my first band, which was myself, Joel Quartermain, who I went on to do Eskimo Joe with, Simon Leach, who went on to be Little Birdie, and another guy, Stu Leach, who was Simon's brother. And so we formed a band called Freud's Pillow. We thought we were very, very clever because it's Freud's pillow and it's like a pillow slip, and you have a Freudian slip.
Oh,
it's a terrible band name, but we thought we were very clever. So anyway, we did that for a while, and we entered the campus band competition in Perth, and we came second. We didn't win, but we were starting to build up a pretty good following in Perth.
That look on your face. Sorry, the look on your face then when you said we came second.
Yeah,
I get the feeling you thought you should have won it.
I'm sure most people have this complex, but we all think that we should always win it. That's just how it is. But no, we didn't win that, and then that was 1996, and the next year, 1997. By that stage, I was enjoying being in the band, but once again, I wasn't really. The songs that I was writing, I didn't feel like the band sounded like that. I didn't really want to play Mr. Bungle, Faith No More-ish kind of, funk metal anymore. That I had no interest in that. I wanted to do I wanted to record stuff that I thought was cool, and so I was writing all these kind of I love the Pixies. They had become one of my most favorite bands at that point in time in my life. So I wanted to do a kind of a folky version of the Pixies, basically. They were the songs that I was writing. And I was writing with my friend Stu McLeod, who is in Eskimo Joe, and I showed them to Joel, who was in my band at the time, and he said, "Oh, I want to be in a band where you write all the songs and tell everyone what to do." And I was like, well, really? You can be in my band. Of course, if anyone's ever met Joel, it didn't work out like that. He's an amazing producer and he's very good at telling us what to do. But we had this magical thing that happened when me and Stu and Joel got into a room for the first time. We had this really great chemistry of personalities going on. And anyone who's been in a band, who's had a clunky band or this band, you don't really know when something's going well until you're with a bunch of people that it's going really well with. And so myself, Stu and Joel, we're still in Eskimo Joe, 21 years later. And it's because we have just a very, musically, yes, we play with each other and we have a thing that we do in Eskimo Joe, but personality-wise, we have really complementary personalities, and we manage to work in this three-way personality love-in. It's why it still works. And as soon as we got in the room, that happened. And so, remember the previous year where we had lost the campus band competition? Mm-hmm. I'd written this one song called Sweater, and Joel was like, because he'd been through the campus band competition. It was a big deal, by the way, in Perth in the mid-90s because, Triple J was blowing up. You had all these cool indie bands that were doing really well. And we saw the campus band competition as a ticket out of Perth. If you won the campus band competition in Perth, you got a ticket to the East Coast. If you won the whole campus band competition, you got to record an EP and all the rest of it. So we were like, this is our ticket out of here. We don't have any money. Like, this is how we're going to do it. So we'd only done like three. Like the first three shows we did were the Campus Band competition, and basically Joel said to me, if you can write 3 more songs that sound just like Sweater, we'll win the whole Campus Band competition. So I went home and I was like, okay, cool, 3 more songs like Sweater, and it wasn't what I was doing. Like, I still wanted to do this kind of more Pixies. Like, I was probably getting into bands like Blur and Supergrass by this stage. But I went home and I wrote 3 more songs that kind of sound like Sweater, and lo and behold, we won the whole Campus Band competition, and we were like, and it's by our 3rd or 4th gig. So, you know, we got to record an EP on that. That was part of the competition. We did that, and then we were really, really lucky that a lady called Jane Gazzo, who's still around, she heard the EP and she heard Sweater, and she was like, this is a great song, and started playing it on the radio. And then we basically started touring, and that was, let me check my watch, 21 years ago. And
wow, man.
And we only stopped this year because of COVID-19.
Wow. That's really cool. Okay, so from that EP then, how far on until you recorded the first album? Hang on, I'm gonna make. Hang on, I've got the list of all the albums here, and I wanted to make it sound like I know what I'm talking about.
Sweet.
So I'll cut out. So it'll be seamless.
This should be part of the pod. This is the most entertaining part of the podcast so far. Is you talking about this? No, well, we did. What happened is we started touring because we knew that, you know, it's really hard to explain. Perth is such an isolated place, and in the late 90s, it was even more isolated. And so, if you got a chance to get on the road and tour, you were not going to let that go. So our first 2 tours on the back of Sweater were 10 weeks long, and we just literally went up and down the East Coast playing to as many people as we could. And then at the end of that time, we literally begged, borrowed, and stole like as much money as we could get our hands on, which is about $4,500. And we went to a guy called Lindsay Gravina, who had just done the Living End record that was doing really well, and he'd done all the Magic Dirt records and stuff. And we loved the sound of his records. We're like, his records sound great. And so we went in and we recorded a second EP, and which had songs like Turn Up Your Stereo and another song called Ruby Wednesday, which is, Ruby Wednesday, incidentally, was a song that we'd written for our previous band, Freud's Pillow, but we were like, that's a good song, let's take that one. And then we filmed a big gig that we did with supporting someone at a place called the Roundhouse in Sydney. I don't know if that venue's still around, but it's like a big uni gig. And anyway, we filmed ourselves doing that. We just kind of synced it up to the recording, and we got some interest from some record companies, and that's when we signed our first record deal.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. Did you guys ever have, through those 6 albums, did you have any major issues with record labels, and have you got any record label stories? You don't have to name them. Don't name it. I don't want you to name anything, but
I've got so many. I don't even know where to begin. We were being kind of courted by this one chap who shall remain nameless, but he was lovely and he'd put a lot of energy into the band. But then, who swept in? But the suavest, coolest cat on the block, which was the chap called Pav, or Stephen Pavlovich. And Pav's still around. I don't think he's allowed to operate anymore because he's used up his 9 lives. But he started the Vivid Festival. He signed the Avalanches. He signed the Living End. He had a label called Modular. He also had many touring companies called Pav Presents and whatever. But he just kept going bankrupt all the time. But he kind of came in and he was just like the cool dude, and he was just like, you know what? I reckon you should sign to my label. And we're like, sounds great. And I'm really glad we did, because we were in really good company. Like the Avalanches were killing it. The Living End were killing it at the time. That it was a really good roster to be on, and it was cool because it was indie enough, like they were a subsidiary of EMI, I think, at the time. And we signed to him, and we kind of got through the first record, and we'd sold gold, but we thought we should have sold a lot more, and we were a little bit upset by the fact that he had allowed a massive amount of debt to be racked up on our bill without checking with us. He just kind of let that happen creatively.
In what way?
Well, to do with, we had a producer who came in and he just kind of let stuff happen. We stayed in hotels, we did bits and pieces and stuff, and his job was to kind of really to keep an eye on what was going on, and he was just letting the money be spent because he was just like, not my money, you guys got to pay it back. And the one thing I will say for Pav is that creatively he is very, very good at putting creatives together. He has an amazing nose. This is the guy who discovered the Beastie Boys, when they were big overseas, and he brought them over to Australia to start touring. This is the guy who signed Nirvana to do a massive Australian tour on the back of Bleach when no one knew who they were. And then, this is how he made his money. They came over and Nevermind came out, and it was fucking huge. And they, they honoured the deal and came out and did these venues, and it's now Australian folklore, those shows. But Pav, fast forward down the road, he's got himself a record label. And so anyway, we were doing that, and we very stupidly, on bad advice from our manager at the time, because you can't have stories about record labels without having stories about the managers as well. These are, it is a microcosm of relationships going on. Anyway, so from our manager at the time, we decided to take up the advice to go to Pav and say, we think that you should just release us from our record deal because we work really hard and we've sold all these records on the back of us touring, and you haven't done shit because you're spending all your time on the Avalanches. Some of that may have been true, but you don't do that. That is like such an idiotic move, because Pav did what he could do, which was turn around and say, no, I have you guys under contract and now you're fucked because I'm not going to actually do anything with you. You guys just... And so we had this ARIA award where it was like our first proper ARIA we'd been to, and, Girl had been critically... our first record had been, critically accepted really well. We'd made some great video clips. We'd won an ARIA or two. We actually we'd done really well. In hindsight, we'd actually done really had a good campaign, and but we now were between record labels because there was no way he was going to work with us again and release it and put out another one of our records. In the meantime, all of his other bands had pretty much done the same thing with Pav, and so we had this weird time where we kind of went home and we didn't know whether we were going to be able to release another record again, but we just started writing, and we'd saved up a bit of money, so we started. We found the producer we wanted to work with. We demoed up the songs. We had about a year and a half, almost 2 years of COVID-like isolation life as a band, and we wrote pretty much 2 albums in that time, but we condensed them down to one record, which is A Song Is a City, which is our second record. So we went in and we recorded it with the guy we wanted to record it with, a lovely, lovely chap called Paul McKercher, who has done lots of records. You can look him up. But
I did today. I looked them up today. Yeah.
He's legend. So anyway, we came home. We had an amazingly recorded record. We were really happy with it. We hadn't mixed it yet, but we became pretty good friends through. Joel was dating this girl called Belinda, who played in a band called Lash. I don't know if you remember Lash.
No.
Anyway, they had a record. They were out there doing their thing. We did a big tour with them. Joel and Belinda were like, "I love you," and started, became boyfriend and girlfriend. And then
are you gonna get in trouble from your bandmates for taking piss out of them?
They probably take much more of the piss out of me. I'm the lead singer in the band. I'm the guy who gets the most piss taken out of him. So just to be fair, no, I love my bandmates. They're amazing.
Yeah. Of course.
But basically through Belinda, we met her A&R person, which is a lady called Kath Harrity. And she heard the demos and she was like, "This is a really, really great record." And behind the scenes, she got another chap called Michael Parisi, who's still around. He was the head of Festival Mushroom, And he basically, she said, you need to buy their contract off Modular. So he went in and, Pav, thinking that nothing was going on, didn't realise we'd been kind of working behind the scenes or whatever, basically sold the contract to Michael Parisi, and we went on Festival Mushroom, and we managed to kind of wipe the slate clean and start again afresh, a little bit wiser, knowing that, we're not just going to spend other people's money, because it's not other people's money, it's our money that we're spending. So we'd learned some lessons and all the rest of it, but we did that album, and at the end of that record, it became pretty clear that a lot of our problems that we'd had with Pav, as well as a massive international record deal falling through, were pretty much because of our manager at the time. She'd pissed a lot of people off, and so we had to kind of make a decision. We liked our manager, and we were very loyal people, but we had to make a decision of like, well, if we want to move forward in the industry, no one likes this person, and she's ruined all these really, really key relationships. So we fired her, and we went into the studio, and we'd already demoed, and then we self-produced and recorded Black Fingernails Red Wine. So we got out of this thing, and we had a Festival Mushroom, which was the record label, had been bought up by Warner's, and that had been turned into Mushroom Records under Warner's now. And all the same people still working there. Really, really, we had a great relationship with them. They were all really cool people, including Catherine Harrity. She was still our A&R person. And so I got back home, and I was kind of sitting in my lounge room on my beanbag, and I was like, well, what are we going to do now? We've recorded this record. We're about to renegotiate a record contract. Like, we were out of contract because Festival Mushroom had bought our Modular contract. That was a 3-album deal. And we had just finished Black Fingernails Red Wine, which was our 3rd record. And so I was like, what are we going to do? And then I was just thinking about the idea of the thinking about people like Pav and our ex-manager and these people, who were kind of there for us and stuff, but it's really, really obvious that you need to find people in the industry who champion you, who get what you do, and will listen to you whinge through the really, really hard times, because there will be hard times and you will whinge, and I thought about it, and I was like, who is that person? And I was like, well, Catherine Harrity is that person. And so I called Joel and I said, I think we should ask Kath to leave her job at the record label and come and be our manager. And she'd never been a manager before. And so we got over, we were just doing the last bits of recording of the Black Fingernails Red Wine record. And Kath came to visit us at the studio, and we were like, how would you like to leave your job at Festival at Warner's and come and work for us as our manager? And she said, okay. And she came on board, and then she was the one who got to renegotiate our new contract. So she knew how the record company worked, knew all the people involved, already had a great relationship. And our previous experience had been, a manager who had a terrible relationship with the head of the label, and so it was this point of tension all the time. So we had someone who had a great relationship with all these people, went in, negotiated an amazing contract, and then on we went, and we're still with Kath after all these years. I mean, record companies had kind of come and gone. There's about 1 million more stories I could tell you that I won't. But really, the gist of the story is find those people who understand the band and will champion you in the industry, because it is so important. Because as an artist, we're not going to be those people. You need that other person in between you and the rest of the industry.
Brilliant. Now that we're on Black Fingernails and Red Wine, let's talk about how that blew up, because that fucking blew up, eh? When you're writing that album, writing those songs and recorded them and mixed them, did you have an idea that this stuff's really, really good and could potentially be the stuff that gives us that commercial success?
I think your ambition grows as big as your world, I think, is the best way to put it. Because when we had been doing the previous record, we had been the record before that, we were very indie. We were like, we just want to be an indie band. We want to be cool. We want to be indie. And then we did A Song as a City, and it allowed us to relax into the fact that we want to write slightly larger ideas. We want to write songs that are a bit bigger than just this, like, oh, we're okay being this little band here. And so at the end of that experience, I personally was like, well, that was really satisfying. I felt like with A Song as a City, the sound in my head, to the songs I was writing, to the sound of the record was it was all like, as I heard it came
cool.
out.
Very good.
And so the next place was like, well, where do you go next? And my first point was like, well, I now want to try and write something that has this large kind of mysterious, the only way I can explain it is I wanted to write something that was widescreen, and my reference to widescreen for me was more like bands like Icehouse. For Joel in the band, it was probably bands like In Excess a little bit more. But I had been listening to Eurythmics. I'd rediscovered Eurythmics a lot, and I had like Eurythmics best of CD that I would drive around in my car listening to. And I would listen to songs like, Sweet Dreams and stuff, and I was just like, fuck, that still sounds so good, and it's got this kick drum going the whole time and this dark chord progression. And generally when I write songs, I'm like, I listen to a song and I'm like, I want to write a song like that. And so I like that. And I also had been kind of rediscovering In Excess and listening to I don't think I'd ever really gotten into In Excess in the same way that Joel had in the band. But I was listening to Michael Hutchins' vocals and I was just like, man, he's just like, he has this mystery about how he sings. And I was like, imagine if you recorded a widescreen record and you could be like, pretend you were Michael Hutchins, and make it sound dark and brooding and cool like Eurythmics, because that was my sonic reference. But the other thing is with A Song as a City, we had gone to the ARIA Awards and we had been nominated for 8 ARIA Awards. And I think we won like 2 of them. And every single award would come up and we lost it to Jet. And they were like, and so we were sitting at this table and they're like, and the winner is Jet.
Right.
And we'd gone to the ARIA Awards like thinking this was our big year, and we'd all gone and bought suits. Like really like we were going to a school ball or something.
Right.
And so we basically rocked up like dorks, like at a dress going to a school ball, and every time Jet walked up onto stage, they looked like rock stars.
They had their shirts off?
Like
almost.
Man, they were just there was all that,
Yeah.
There was like the hair was out, there was leather jackets. They looked like a fucking rock band. And I was like, and so the penny dropped for me, like with A Song as a City, I was so hell bent on being like, this is an album about I'm an artist, I'm writing about being a kid from Fremantle and my experience of, looking out at the world, and this is real for me. But we had lost this massive international record deal through that period of time, like I talked about with the manager and all the rest of it. And I looked at Jet on stage and I was like, the penny dropped. I was like, it's not good enough to be these kids from Fremantle. You have to be the rock star. And so I went home and I was like, okay, what does a rock star look like? So I got myself some black stretch tight jeans. I got myself a leather jacket. I dyed my hair black. I painted my fingernails black. And I was like, yeah, this is what a rock star looks like. And I had this idea, which was, if I pretend to be a rock star, maybe everyone will believe I'm a rock star.
Right.
So on top of that, once I'd got this kind of new rock star disguise on, I was like, well, what kind of songs would a rock star write? And so I started to write these songs where it was these kind of widescreen, expansive songs. And it was a really nice moment in the band where everyone was on the same page. Everyone was like, yeah, ambitiously, let's do something bigger. Let's do something, ambitious. Because in Australia, I felt like at that point in time, it wasn't okay to do that. You have bands like, what's a good example? Like Gang of Youths or I don't know who else, but they're the only band in Australia who are really trying to be an international act in that sense was pretty much Silverchair at that point in time. They were like, yeah, we're going to be rock stars. Fuck you,
What album would they, around what album would that have been for them? So what was
they would have just
2006?
come off the back of Diorama, I think.
Right. Right.
And of course you had Jet, who had just and you had the Vines as well, who both had some international success. So it was in the air. We were like, yeah, this is possible. And all those things kind of fed into like the zeitgeist of all these little ingredients fed into, the creation of Black Fingernails Red Wine. And the songs that we wrote for that, I wasn't pretending to write real songs about my real experiences. Like songs like New York and Sarah and London Bombs, they're real experiences that I'm writing about. But the way that I decided to present them was I was just like, let's kick off the shackles of this. We're just a little indie band. Like, what would happen if we wrote a song for the world? Like something that would sound as good as bands like that we were listening to at the time. Like, I don't know, Interpol was a band we really loved at the time, and a bunch of other bands. Let's write a record that sounds as international and cool as these records. Like, let's fuck the Tall Poppy thing. So we went into that, and on top of that, we decided to produce it ourselves. And we found an amazing engineer called Matt Lovell, who'd funnily enough worked on a bunch of INXS stuff and worked out of Gary Beer's old studio. And so we were like, yep, the stars have aligned. This is going to happen. And so we went there, and it was just such a harmonious experience. It was one of those moments where the stars just aligned. Everyone was on the same page. We got in there, we worked really, really hard, and we came out with this result that we were really happy with. But on top of that, I think the reason why it did well is that if a band manages to get to album number 3, they've hopefully built up 3 albums of fans. And so by the time you get there, you've already got these people who are going to fill a 1,000 capacity venue. But then if you get a hit and the secretaries love it and they're just like, I love this band, then you have this kind of this tip over thing. And I think that we were really, really lucky to be in an era where that was possible. I feel like in the current climate, you can be much more international in your approach. I think the mindset is much better for young bands coming up. But I think to be able to, get to album number 3, it's almost impossible because there's no money in it. You can't sell records anymore, and there's also the world just moves really, really quickly. But in saying that, if you're really good at what you do and you're an amazing artist, and I use an example like Tame Impala, then good music is good music. People are going to see it.
Yep. Where did you record Black Fingernails Red Wine?
At this really, really great studio. We went back there for Ghosts of the Past, and which was our 5th record. We went back there. It's like just near Gosford as you kind of cruise out of Sydney.
Oh, is this Gary? Was at Gary Beer's studio?
Yeah. So when we were there, it was owned by a lady called Darlene Love, who was she was a Hillsong country star,
right?
So it had a bit of a Hillsongy vibe floating around when we were there, which was kind of weird, but they were cool. They didn't preach. And then now it's funnily enough, it's been bought up by a guy called Scott Horscroft, who was one of the co-owners in the studio that we did a Songs of City in, which was a studio called Big Jesus Burger, and Scott Horscroft was one of the chaps involved with that.
So when you recorded Black Fingernails Red Wine, this was obviously a time where they're still selling physical copies. You were still in that time. You were around in a good time where you could make some money off album sales and stuff. When did it? Sorry, go.
I was going to say, yes, you could pay back the debt that you'd incurred to the record company.
Right. So how sort of far in, at which album did things start to sort of change there and the whole streaming thing come out and physical copies not being
it
sold?
Started for us, it was an interesting thing because, you talked about the record company stories. Like we formed our own label in about 2013. And we put out a bunch of records that we produced of other bands. There's a great band called The Chemist, who are probably our favourite band that we had on our label. But we basically formed the label so we could put out our own records eventually. That was the plan. And we were still on Warner's by this stage, and they decided to make our record label a satellite for their label. So we did Ghost of the Past, and then we were starting to write our next record, which was the last Eskies record we put out, called Wastelands. And the head of the label kind of came to us and said, look, you signed this record, so you signed this label under an old deal, which was when we signed our Black Fingernails amazing record deal. And he said, look, we're not going to put out another record unless you guys re-sign with us, which is slightly illegal, but that's okay. And so we kind of saw the writing on the walls. We looked at what was going on with labels, and we were like, streaming was coming in massively. It had just at that point in time in 2013, 14, it was just tipping from like the 10 to 90 to the 70 to 60 to 50. And we were like, well, you know, record labels, why would we sign a deal when we can't actually pay back any of this money? You know, so for better or for worse, what we did is we went, well, you know what? How about we just leave the label now? And they said, okay, and then off we went. And so we did an album called Wasteland, and we did it as a crowdfunding thing, because we were like, well, let's just experiment musically. We decided we were going to make a record that was like sonically and musically quite different. We knew we'd already had a meeting before this record to say to each other in the band, after this record, we've been on this 2-year cycle where, you know, we write, record, release, and we've been doing that year in, year out, and everyone wanted to do some other projects. I wanted to do a solo record. Joel wanted to produce some other records. So we decided that we would do one last record and we'd experiment how it was going to be put out, because we were like, who's going to pay for records in the future? Clearly record companies aren't going to be able to do it because no one's buying records anymore. So we did it, and it was a cool experience. But the really interesting thing was streaming is now cranking. It's like the thing. You know, it's more about, you know, the physical releases. Like, yeah, vinyl sells a little bit and CDs sell a little bit, but really it's about getting millions or billions of streams. And record companies have now adapted to that. And they've actually become like quite good at getting you on playlists, and quite good at, you know, still working the promo side of things, and really creating a great product. So what we drew from that was that it was a great experience. We managed to extract ourselves from our record company, which I think was the right thing to do, because we weren't going to sign a shitty new deal. But we also walked away with an appreciation of what record companies do, and the fact that they play a really key part in the whole process, and what they need to do. We're on the precipice of the whole industry adapting to this new thing. What I've seen record companies do since then is adapt. They're very, very good at it. And they're now like, you know, I wouldn't suggest to anyone to sign a deal that they know that they're not going to make any money out of. So if anyone's listening and they're in a band and they get offered a thing called a 360 deal, do not sign it. 360 deal is basically they take your merch, your publishing, and your record sales. Still only sign for your record sales, because that's all they're entitled to. But for the rest of it, I think they're actually doing a pretty good job.
You do some songwriting workshops with kids.
Yes.
What do you think's the hardest thing for young songwriters at the moment? Do you think it's we were just talking before about Logic, and you know, there's all these bells and whistles that they can sort of play around with and stuff like that. Do you think songwriting's changed and people are getting more into that kind of thing, or are you still getting the young kids singing, I think, and playing instruments?
When I see these kids do these songwriting workshops, all I can think of is like, oh my God, I wish I had this going on when I was young. This would be amazing, because we all had to kind of find our way in it. And, you know, if someone had have said to us back in the day, oh, you should go to school and become a great songwriter, it's just like, why? I'm just going to write songs and get better at it. So there's something bizarre about that side of things, but I love that I get to do this songwriting thing and fill this gap in between what kids do at high school and what they do out in the real world. I feel like that's a key part that I would have loved to have learnt back in the day. As far as, you know, is it easier or harder? I think that, yes, computers can be a massive distraction from the old school of let's just make it sound good on an acoustic guitar and then it'll sound good on everything. Mm-hmm. I think that gets lost a little bit. But in saying that, again, kids are adapting and they're using the computer as their instrument now, and that's okay too. Only problem is there's just crap loads of content coming out. Like everyone's like having a jam on their computer and going, I wrote a song.
Yeah.
But I do think that the really great artists will always rise to the top of the heap. A great artist let's use a Kurt Cobain again as an example, will come along just at that key moment and remind us all, with this completely different angle why the last era was bullshit and this era is important. That needs to keep happening, and we can overanalyze writing a good song. I think songwriting is about craft, and you should do it every day, and you should get better at your craft. As far as computers and all the rest of it go, I'm sure it'll just be absorbed into the whole entire thing at the end of the day.
That's really cool. Kav Temperley, I know you've got to go and cook dinner.
I do.
I hope next year when you get these shows rebooked and you come to Sydney that we can meet up. That
sounds
really cool.
great. Yeah, I'd love that.
It's been a pleasure talking to you, man, and good luck with everything. Hope your remote, the attempt at the remote HatJam podcast goes well. All the best.
Absolutely.
So how can people find you?
If people want to find me, obviously there's Eskimo Joe is easy. Kav Temperley, one word, I think, on Instagram and all other places. And the HatJam podcast is HatJam_podcast.
All the links in the show notes of this podcast, so just go to the show notes and it's all there.
Fantastic.
No
Thanks
worries.
so much for having us, Stevie.
Sweet as Kav.
Cheers,
Take
mate.
it easy, man.
All right. Bye-bye.
See you, bud.
It doesn't mean I'm not your friend if I don't call you and pretend. Sometimes I feel like having fun. So tell me, where did I go wrong? Tell me, 'cause no one really knows you when you're out there on your own. You're drifting like a stranger and rolling like a stone. You're going round in circles, going round the bend. Come on, Diana, I'm gonna give you everything. Ooh. Now the party's over and your friends have left the room. Are you looking for the truth? 'Cause lately I've got nothing to lose. So tell me, 'cause no one really knows you when you're out there on your own. You're drifting like a stranger and rolling like a stone. You're going round in circles, going round the bend. Come on, Diana, I'm gonna give you everything. Ooh. I'm gonna give you everything. Ooh. So tell me, 'cause no one really knows you when you're out there on your own. You're drifting like a stranger and rolling like a stone. 'Cause no one really knows you when you're out there on your own. You're drifting like a stranger and rolling like a stone.